Look for a motion to approve the agenda. We do have 2 items on the agenda, which is council education and training topics. First one is capital improvement plan 101. And the second one is our sign ordinance. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That carries. Capital improvement 101.
Okay. I don't know what it is. I literally just came on a patch. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's good. Council, you keep eating and just feel free to ask questions because I know that this is a longer presentation and I sent it out purposefully with the notes so you could review it ahead of time too. So, are we good?
We're good.
Oh, good call. One thing I will mention is that, and we record all of our workshops, but just know that we're recording this one especially to use it as a training tool with Bart and Brent when they start, just because we think this will be a good opportunity for staff to also use as a training piece going forward. So just keep that in mind that it is being recorded and it is going to be used and watched. So council, I'm going to kick this off really high level, leading us into the fiscal year 2026 budget planning process. And you can see here our roadmap for that, steady and strategic. This is not something we've done before. We have historically just kind of dove into the specifics in late July, August, and we go right into the preliminary levy in September. And Rob has really been working hard on how do we make this more of a comprehensive process and really own what our messaging is within it, both to department heads and our team, to council, to the public. But also, as we get to that preliminary levy and 0% tax rate, really feeling comfortable that every single decision we're making as a part of it is holistically, and that there aren't these feelings of things being made singularly and in a vacuum. And I know that's been a feeling that we've had in previous years. And so a big piece of that is kicking off with this educational piece, which is not something we've ever done before. We have done a little piece of education as we orientate new council members, but for those of you who just got orientated, you know it's a fire hose. I mean, you're getting a version of multiple different items throughout the city, so it's really hard to give it much merit. And so I hope that as we walk out of here tonight, that the feedback from council is that this was really well received and helpful as we move into the actual specific part of our budget process. The other new piece that we have as a part of this roadmap is really owning a narrative around it. So this year you'll notice our theme being steady and strategic. That was after thoughtful consideration by Rob as he's been reviewing our financial plans and financial management plan and walking into this year and knowing what the situation so far looks like. Steady and strategic, sustaining steady operations while building strategic reserves is really what our motto is, and we want to be able to present that out to staff as well, that we have a plan, let's all get on board with this, and let's jump in and take this journey together. So you'll notice tonight we're at the first workshop, which is the CIP 101, and then we'll continue on, and now you know what to expect of every single workshop going forward. So diving into CIP plans and starting way at the beginning of just getting a base level understanding of what is a CIP plan. It's a multi-year roadmap. It outlines all of our planned investments in infrastructure, equipment, and major assets, typically 5 to 10 years. It's both a planning and budgeting tool. You can see all of the different items that we plan for within that. It doesn't authorize spending itself. We have to come back to you to authorize any of that, but it creates a plan for it. I know we talked at the last council meeting of, is this a budget? Is it an inventory? It's maybe a combination of that, neither of those, somewhere in the middle. We'll get into that as we go here. What we've done is, when Rob and I started, we took everything pre-2020 and we built it into an inventory, started with 5 years to assign numbers to it, now have moved to 10 years. But I stand up here today feeling 110% confident that we have captured every single asset, project, infrastructure need of the city. May not be budgeted for, but it is captured and accounted for within this plan, which is not something we could say 5 years ago. And so that was really our first goal. And I think as we've navigated each year, we've gotten a little bit better on this. We added the financial policies when Jed started, which helped us extend this from 5 years to 10 years. and really just keep getting better and better every single year. I do want to point out that the one area, if you had asked me what we're the weakest in our planning assessment, and I want as a priority in 2026 is our buildings. We have relatively new buildings in the grand scheme of things, and I worry that we're going to get in the same place with buildings as we've gotten to in roads. We're out of sight, out of mind because they're new right now, and then you get 20 years down the road and you haven't planned enough for it. And so facilities assessment is top priority that I'd like to get added into this plan with Rob's help. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me. I know you guys are eating, but if you have questions as we go, just interrupt.
Can I interrupt right now?
Yeah.
I mean, just because it's Wade Park is redoing their city hall and stuff. How is city hall situated? I mean, this building's what, 24 years old now?
Yeah, actually really well.
Yeah, okay. We don't see the need to
Space-wise, we did some reconfiguring. We took some of the offices were quite large. We sliced them in half, created 2 offices out of them. We did that in 2 different areas. On top of that, we were able to use some of the, oh, Ryan, was that CARES Act dollars that we used? CARES Act dollars that helped improve this space, which was probably the most outdated space here. But from an office space perspective, we have a couple open seats still.
Okay, great. Happy to hear
Yeah, we're actually really in a great spot. And I think if we grow to a point of, needing to shift around some administrative staff, I think there's other buildings that actually could be good fits that would prevent us from needing to do anything here. I'm very satisfied and impressed with how well this building has. No, this building has actually served us very well. I'm quite surprised. It's a lot of, like you said, Wade Park is expanding theirs. There's a lot of cities that are building new administrative offices, and we've been just fine. But we're not afraid to double up to community center has taken Nikki's whole team, so that opens up her office. So we've got other buildings that we can leverage as well. So let's dive into, when we talk about a CIP plan, what does that mean specifically for Sartell? So you have all of our CIP plans are listed up there. When you hear the word CIP plan, know that those are the ones that we're talking about. This is one of my favorite tools that I will teach people that I'm going to recruit to be future government junkies, is understanding the difference between CIP and then our general fund and then our enterprise fund, because they get intermixed, and this is where it is the hardest to feel like you're making a decision that isn't in a vacuum, because it typically involves multiple different funds. So if you can try to remember, general fund is like your checking account, that's your operational, it's your day-to-day. CIP fund is like your savings account, you're putting money away in these funds to build up, what do they say personally, 6 months of, be able to cover your bills, kind of same type of concept. Enterprise fund is if you had a, side LLC business that you're running and you're billing people for and you're invoicing for. Those are your things that we've charged rates for, and we actually run almost like a private business of the city. Purpose and benefits of CIP, you can see a lot of the reasons why these are really helpful for cities. Strategic planning, transparency. We put everything out on our projects and performance site. It helps us with financial forecasting. Grants is a big one. I think that was a huge area of focus that we started with the financial policies as well, of how do we get strategic about what grants we're applying for and what match funds we actually have, and not just applying for every single grant and then not actually having the match funds to be able to fund them. And then of course, asset management as well. One thing to always keep in mind is that CIP, people hear the word capital and they automatically think we're only talking about streets or water different utilities or infrastructure. It is every single, any asset of the city. Think buildings, equipment, infrastructure, streets, roadways. I mean, the paths that we were talking about in the Wilds Park would be something that would be included in a capital improvement plan. How is the CIP utilized? So this is kind of the inventory piece of it that we talked about last time. You get it on an inventory and you have awareness of it, you identify it, create a prioritization system, schedule it, phase it out, make sure it aligns with your goals, make sure council's on board with what our priorities are, especially that year one. And I'll get into stressing the importance of that as we go here. Then you add the financial aspect. So this is where it turns from an inventory into more of a budget, I think would be a a planning tool. Not exactly a budget, but you assign numbers to it. Numbers aren't exact because you haven't gone out for bid, and most of these items require bids. But we will look at past projects, we'll look at inflationary factors, we'll look at what other cities have gotten bids back on some of these projects, and we'll plug in numbers that are usually relatively close. When you see us come up here and say engineer's bid was X, that's the number we were using in our CIP. Is an engineer's, typically, like if it's a roadway, we're using their numbers. Equipment, we can usually get a little bit closer because we can get some quotes from vendors. I'd say first year or two of the CIP, more solidified. 3 to 10, it's more of just a placeholder there that we're putting a number to. And then we'll finalize them as we get closer. Then the other really key piece is that you've got the expenditure side and then the revenue side. So every single item within this CIP that Rob has built into this spreadsheet is tied to a revenue. So that might be levy dollars, that might be sales tax dollars, it might be building permit revenues, but every single one of them is accounted for on the revenue side as well. I know this is really small, and we're gonna have to figure out how to do this next meeting, because next meeting we're gonna actually dive into the specific spreadsheets in every single fund. But I just wanted to give you a visual of, this is a really small snapshot of the massive CIP book that Rob keeps. So it lists out every single project, lists out the funding source. You can see the years there and where they're phased, and then there's some notes that he keeps track of, and then he links them to balance sheets and priorities. This is where, as we get into this, I'm gonna stress, council, if you, especially that year one, like for us it'll be 2026, really making sure we're dialed in on that year one, because that year one is what our marching orders are then as we go plan for grants and prioritization as we go forward in that year.
Council, one thing I'd call out is, I think we need to get in a 2-year cycle on this. And by that I mean, we stand for election every 4 years, which means every 2 years, 2 if not 3 of us may be replaced. And as a new incoming council member, this I feel is a great way for the newly elected council that'll serve together for a minimum of 2 years. It's a way for them to ratify the plan that was in place or is in place, and to keep it going forward. Also understanding what's in flight. I can think over just this last 6 months here, we've had a number of projects that have come forward from previous councils, and this council might not value them to the same extent that a previous council valued them. So I think it's important that we get onto a better routine moving forward of that 2-year cycle, so that as we are seated as a new council, here's what we certainly want our staff to focus on, and it allows us to reprioritize at that point in time, rather than a full annual review. I feel like we're probably moving the chess pieces around far too often if we're doing it full scale annually. I think there's validity in an annual review, but just maybe not
As in depth.
seismic movements.
Rob, you just want to take notes on that of that. I think then we really hone in on when we go through here, and you'll hear me say, like, really make sure you're guiding us on year one. Think about it as year 1 and 2, if I'm capturing what Mayor Fitzum's saying. How is the CIP funded? So this is the revenue side. Every single project's linked to typically multiple funding sources. It's rarely just one. So it could be any of these items here. It could be levy, bonds, utility fees, enterprise funds. This is where it all kind of starts to come together. Special assessments, grants, franchise fees, proceeds from sales of assets. It's diversified, but that's on purpose because we don't want to be reliant on any one funding source. And then also know that some, if not all of these revenue sources are restricted in one way or another by design. And so we know that we have to propose a 0% tax rate. We know that we have required fund balances. We know that we have a debt policy. Deferred assessments are per our OAA agreement. And then some of the funds are restricted either by policy or by state statute. And so we account for that within our balance sheets for each capital improvement fund as well, to make sure that we're in line with our policies. And so many of these policies were added in 2023 and have really allowed us to take this from a 5-year to a 10-year because we know what our guardrails are. These policies are probably some of my favorite parts of our entire CIP. It really elevated what we were doing, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later of how important they are also for our rating, our credit rating. So for Sartell, here's how each of our funds that we were looking at earlier, like these are our CIP funds, here's how they are funded. Here's the buckets of money that go into each one of those CIP funds. So you can see how it varies from fund to fund. Many of them do have a property tax levy, if not all of them except for the sales tax fund. And then some of them have additional funding sources.
Two quick things. What is roundup contributions?
Yeah, so on your utility bill, you have the option to round up to the nearest dollar. If you do, we take that difference and put it into the park improvement fund. And the park commission has been more intentional about the marketing of that, and I think it's for.
That's one of their goals that they would, they plan to do a better job of marketing that.
And beautification. So the roundup to the nearest dollar goes into park improvement and then can be used per the park commission's recommendation and your approval.
And then also just, I guess, clarification, but when you say property tax levy on individual funds, it is the same levy. It's not a separate levy across all of that. It's the same general levy that goes out and we allocate the
You split
funding
it up.
internally.
Yep. Rusty, did you have anything? Same question? Okay.
One thing that we have discussed previous councils is a public safety levy, a specific public safety levy. So our public safety usually makes up 60-ish% of our overall levy. And there are some communities that have a separate public safety levy.
On the operational side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, a little bit of it comes down to how does that taxpayer, how do you want them to perceive the tax bill? Just one big lump sum, or do you want them to recognize the amount of their taxes that are going into a public safety fund? I think there's value there as I look at our community and how much support our public safety departments garner. It does restrict us a little bit of what we can then do. Those funds absolutely have to go to public safety, whereas today we have the ability to move some of those funds around. But I bring that up as there are different levers that we can employ that impact the perceived differences at a taxpayer level.
Rob, do you want to take note of that one too?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just
okay.
wrote that down. And it would mechanically be pretty easy. When I send our levy to the county, they ask the separate line items. It would just be us creating a public safety levy on top of the other levies. So certainly something we can do.
This maybe 4 years ago, I felt like we were driving that, and we had a really specific campaign message out of how much money is going to public safety.
Sure.
There's a point in time when tax rate was adjusting up. So again, a little bit of a marketing ploy there.
And you mentioned another point too that I wanted to make sure to touch on is, shifting funds around. And so these are all their own separate balance sheet, but it's not uncommon, and cities can get in trouble a little bit of borrowing from fund to fund. It's not, as long as you put an interfund loan to it, then it's not as bad. None of our funds right now are at a balance that can tolerate that, but it is something that I know Sartell has used in the past. If there's a fund that's really healthy, you can interfund loan to another one. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit more complex, and these are the balance sheets that we will go through in more depth, and like I said, we're gonna have to figure out how to do this so you guys can actually read it. But every single one of the funds that you saw in the previous slides that we have holds a balance sheet. This is just looking at the income and expense portion of it. I couldn't fit it all on one slide. But the things that I really wanted to point out here is take a note, I think this is the street fund, so take note of the top part, which is all the revenues, and street fund is one of the funds that has probably the most revenue sources. So you can see all of those are listed out there. So we will track all the revenues and then we'll project those out for 10 years. Then take note at the bottom are all of the projects that were on that inventory spreadsheet are moved out over here and listed by year. At the bottom there, I wanted to especially call out that this is where we track the policy compliance. And so Rob has calculations built in here to make sure that we're meeting fund balances at the end. You can see the street fund is out of compliance until 2027 due to the purchase of the mill district. And so we're working on building those funds back up. So every single balance sheet ends with that line there where we check compliance to other policies. So long story short, you've got all your revenue sources, you've got all your projects and expenditures, and then you're checking to make sure you're in compliance. And every single fund has a balance sheet just like this for 10 years. These are the balance sheets that every department head is working on currently right now, which will then bring to you with any revisions or suggestions in June.
And council, just a comment on this, the top line of that property tax, Rob will determine a number, to use year over year. And that's, as we get into it further, I think that's a really important number that we need to all wrap our head around. Because that single number can deviate a percent or two and has a much different outlook. And we all need to be in alignment that what we believe there is realistic. It comes down to our property valuation increases. Through COVID, I don't think anyone would have expected the surge that we saw. Historically, we kept that number really low, I believe under a 3% or at 3%, which again, if we're budgeting conservatively, we stay on the better side of that balance sheet versus if we plug in a 5 or 6% and only achieve 3%, it will compound every year moving forward, where we can certainly get in trouble quickly. Rob, anything to add on that?
No, that's a good point. Just being able to budget more conservatively and plan for some of those worse years, because the last few years have been sort of the anomaly based on historicals. So not planning for 17%, 9% like we've had, but more conservatively so that we can plan accordingly, more realistic.
Yeah, so the amount of the property tax going to the street fund, why is that such a variable number, and what happens in 2032 that it goes up by $1 million?
Yeah, so as long as our valuations are able to increase by 5% and we're able to keep operating at a 2.5% increase year over year, we have more to contribute to our capital funds. And the street fund being a very big priority for the council, we're able to stick more in there. So as long as our community continues to grow, we're able to condense our operating increases to 2.5%, 3%. That just allows us to put more into the street fund.
And Pat, I'd have to go back and look, but sometimes when you see large jumps like that, it could be that like debt's expiring or a TIF is expiring.
Okay, that's what I was looking
Yeah.
at. I mean, because that's a
Big number, yeah.
40% increase roughly. So I was just curious. I mean, because you're right. I mean, if our revenues are going up by 5%, I would expect a slowly, gradually increasing contribution to that fund. But it's kind of all over the board, and then it takes this giant leap in 2030.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that is a TIF district. I think that's Topin Merrill coming off of the TIF and into our tax base.
Okay.
Is what I assume there. But I think more to come on a few
Yeah,
slides when
I'll get into that in a spreadsheet to come, but I'm glad you notice it, and those are the things that, as you look at these, the further you get out, it gets a little bit more fluid, but noticing how things are being adjusted to hit that 0% tax rate, and calling that out just to make sure we have complete understanding, because I think that's where we haven't always done a good job of explaining what those variations are and what they're as a result of. And so I'm glad you asked the question, because it helps remind us that we need to be clear about that.
And we did take previous action to limit. I feel like we maybe got halfway there, but we used to pull out of the street fund.
Mm-hmm.
It was somewhat looked like as a slush fund that, hey, if we needed it somewhere else, we could pull the street fund. And so previous council, I forget what year, did put limitations in that once it is in the street fund, it has to be used for streets.
I think it was in 2023 because that was when we had that 17% hike, and we put all the valuation dollars there and then restricted it and said it's got to go to streets.
As we sit here today, and we heard last council meeting or maybe the one prior, I think we've got $40 million in street demands, and we've got allocated maybe 10, 20,
Yeah,
less than half.
yeah, less than half.
Yeah.
That is one that is easy for this council and future councils to say, we'll kick that can down the road one more year, and it never improves. It has to. I'm a firm believer, like, we have to do those projects above others. And so as we get into this throughout this year, I'd like us to evaluate what would it look to add further constraints specific to the street fund, so that, you know, I'm scared right now when I hear if we stop growing, we can't fund the street fund. If we stop growing for 2 years, our roads don't stop deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in a very challenging spot at that point. And so I'd like us to figure out how we can do that into the future so we don't have these gaps, I guess.
Yeah, Sartell, and we'll get into, we're almost to that spreadsheet, but Sartell almost reverse budgets based on that 0% tax rate, where I think what's more common in cities is that they'll determine what all their needs are and set their levy from that. Well, then that's how you see these budgets that are not within their means and growing and growing and growing. We start at the tax rate at 0% and then go from there. And so, to Ryan's point, if you're not growing, that's where that model can get you in trouble because you're really reliant on that development rate. So the relationship between the CIP, FMP's financial management plan, budget, and levy. So like, how do we bring these all together? Because this is where it can get a little bit confusing. So the CIP, it's a massive spreadsheet of project and asset priorities spread over 10 years. It accounts for revenues and expenditures. It makes sure it checks against policies. And then there's also a separate list of projects that maybe didn't make the cut for the years 1 through 10. So when we say that we have $40 million in projects and only $15 million are planned for, there's a whole chunk of projects that are sitting on a list that have a dollar amount assigned to them, but they haven't made it to years 1 through 10 because we don't have the revenue sources to fund it. You bring those spreadsheets together and tie it into the financial management plan, budget, and levy, and that's where it all comes together. I'm going to show you on this next spreadsheet. It's going to be very small on your screens and overwhelming, but this next spreadsheet, the next two, depending on how you want to look at things, are probably two of the most important as you're going through budget prep. This spreadsheet is my favorite because it's more detailed, but the next one after it might be a little bit more visually appealing if you prefer that route. So I'm going to walk you through different aspects of this. You can see all the years that are listed. This right here is a complete snapshot of nearly everything outside of the enterprise funds. So first, I'm going to highlight these circles in this chunk here. That's the general property tax levy. When we plug in the general government expenditures, so general fund expenditures, and then we also plug in the revenues, and whatever the gap is that we're missing is what goes in, is what we need in that levy spot because they have to balance. So we cover as many of the expenditures as we possibly can with revenues. Revenue sources are pretty limited because this isn't enterprise funds, this is just general government funds. And then whatever is the gap is what goes in that levy. And our ultimate goal being that it balances out and it's structurally balanced. Rob, you wanted to share some input on the structurally balanced aspect of just the importance of that and how we're really striving to get to that place.
Yeah, so we have to be balanced according to our policy, but structural balance is recurring revenues equal to recurring expenditures. So recurring revenues, property taxes, charges for services, license and permits, equal to recurring expenditures, wages, benefits, supplies, materials, so that we're not infusing ARPA dollars, which then fall off and put a lot of pressure on our recurring expenditures. So just being more intentional about the revenue sources that you're budgeting for in the general fund budget, and making sure that they match up with recurring expenditures, so we don't have large variations year over year. And that's where the state gets in trouble. And other cities have giant levy increases year over year, is because more often than not, they're relying on one-time revenues to cover recurring expenditures.
So that's a really critical point to keep in mind. Where you can get in trouble on that item is like grants. You get a one-time infusion of a grant, but then that grant falls off, and you've got an ongoing expense that isn't getting ongoing revenues.
ARPA is the classic example of many
Absolutely.
school districts in
Yep.
the state.
Yeah.
Yep.
They now feel like they can't operate because they're not getting ARPA funding anymore.
A ton of cities are. It was a huge. I don't know if you guys followed any of the reports of the last year, and it'll be this year too. A ton of cities went and funded operational items that are ongoing, hired staff, and then the ARPA dollars dried up, and now they have to increase their levy in order to cover it because it wasn't structurally balanced.
What's the difference between ARPA and LGA?
So LGA is a state statute legislative contribution to cities every single year. ARPA was a one-time because of COVID. That was the
ARPA's
CARES Act was a piece of it, and then ARPA was a piece of it, but it's a one-time.
Okay.
LGA is ongoing. I mean, presumably ongoing year after year.
Is proposed to be cut, 3.1%?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Sartell. 20% overall.
Each year?
Yeah.
Is that what
Yeah, I think it was each year for the next 3 years, which equated to like a 3.1% cut for every community.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure they were able to infuse a lot more dollars a few years ago into LGA,
Yep.
which is where we see the increase from, well, actually this year, 2024 to 2025, of 582,000 to 704,000 because of the one-time federal monies. And then, of course, when that dries up, they have to take it back. And we are planning LGA as a revenue in this spreadsheet, which is pretty optimistic, especially given how easy it is for legislatures to remove
Adjust that.
LGA. Some cities get in the habit of not actually budgeting for it or budgeting for it and contributing it to capital, but Sartell has historically budgeted for it in the general fund, and it's really hard to take out a
That's a big dollar.
$500,000 piece.
We're a year in advance on it. So, like state aid, we're advancing it?
No.
No, okay. So, if it's cut off,
It'll be 2026.
it's not a current impact, it's a future
Yeah.
budget impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thankfully the formula of LGA for Sartell is we actually receive significantly less than most communities. It's based off of age of
housing.
yeah, and ours is so new. But if you talk to some of our regional partners, I mean, they're getting millions, and a 3% on them is
Sauk Rapids in
Hurts.
particular is over 2 million
Yeah.
in LGA annually, right? So when you think about their overall
Budget.
levy amount, and 2 million of that could go one way or the other at the state legislature, it is a big impact. We'll hear a lot about it from especially League of Minnesota Cities asking us to advocate. Frankly, there's cities that are losing millions. They can go advocate, and we'll advocate for other things, in my opinion,
yeah,
because our impact is minimal.
significantly less than theirs for sure.
I mean, the LGA, if you take it back a couple of years, I assume that big spending legislature of 23 that blew an $18 billion surplus, I mean, Trump brought our LGA from 459 to 786. I mean, if we're talking about losing LGA, if we just went back to 459, do you think that's
To
like
be more
worst
conservative,
case?
yeah. I mean, you could plan for that.
The chair of the committee that oversees LGA is from New Hope, and they're the ones that proposed the cut of 20% for each year for 3 years. It equated to like 3.1% all cities, but I don't know that they'll cut that deep. I think they should.
I would
For us,
suspect
it's
they're
a
going to cut something. I don't know how far they'll go.
$300,000 impact. For other communities, it's upwards of $1 million impact, right? So I guess the point in bringing up LGA in and of itself is it's a funding mechanism that we can't control, and so I think much like state aid or others, we need to become less reliant on it in the future and know that projects that are tied to it need to have some wiggle room as well. Otherwise, the future of our city will continue to be in the hands financially of
The state.
the state.
Okay, so then we're gonna move to this next circle, which is,
State. Yeah.
our debt levies. So this is a number that is set, it's solidified, we can't change it, we're gonna pay our debt payments. So that number is what it is, we don't have any flexibility there. So we plug that in, and you combine all of this together, it's so small for me that I can hardly see. And what you have remaining, once we determine what is our whole pot of money we're dealing with a 0% tax rate, and we subtract out the general fund expenditures and revenues and levy, we subtract out the debt, and whatever's remaining is what gets assigned to capital funds. And so this part, if there's anything you capture today, understand that piece of it, that debt we can't adjust, we have to pay our debt payments. So that number is solid. Your general fund expenditures and general fund revenues, and then whatever that property tax levy, you have some variability there. 75% of the general fund is tied to union contracts that if we're hiring people that are union employees with, covered under the exclusive contracts and benefits, and it's harder to control those numbers because such a huge portion of it is tied to employment that is tied to union agreements. You have some flexibility with about 25% there of supplies, materials, subscriptions. There are some, we've been really trying to move more towards part-time employees and not paying benefits. So you have some of those employees in there. Any of your non-union, which would be supervisor, director level, those would be items that you would have flexibility to fluctuate as a part of that general fund expenditure. But essentially you take that first chunk, you have the debt levy, you know how much money you have because you're setting it at 0%, and whatever's left goes into that CIP bucket and gets divvied out accordingly. So when you see those swings there, it's because of most often because of general fund. Typically we can predict, unless you added debt for some reason. And so this is where monitoring that is really, really important. That's the circle on the bottom is just showing you how we get the bucket of money for the 0%. This green box is where I want to really draw your attention to when you're looking at this spreadsheet year over year, and like Pat, you just did it, earlier on the balance sheet of looking at the changes in the levy for the street fund specifically. Here's where you can capture that summarized all in one spot within that green box, and you can see year over year over year how are those capital funds being impacted based on all the other numbers that are above and below that we just talked through. And so this is an area that we will do a better job of calling out to you, because I know in the 2025 budget when we were prepping that, we shared the levers of, hey, these, the 3 COPs will lead to road and overlay impacts and street fund, but this is the data behind it. This is actually showing you, when we say that as a lever, what does that actually mean? What is the actual dollar amount? What are we talking about here? What does that mean in a value? Here's where you can actually connect the data of that dollar amount straight with what that lever is. And so it's not conceptual, it's the actual solid number. So you can see that between 2024 to 2025 budget, we had been working on really building that up. We'd had multiple years of strong valuations. We were pouring money into these CIP funds. And then in 2025, for a couple different reasons, it wasn't just the hiring of 3 law enforcement, had to dip back into those funds. And dipping into CIP funds is super common, not saying it's what we prefer or, an easy out, but it's very, very common for cities to utilize, because now you can see why. Your debt gets set, you can't change those payments, you get stuck in your general fund because 75% of it is by union, and then ultimately that's what's left, depending on what you want to do with your tax rate. And so inevitably, CIP funds are what end up getting used for the flexibility. One other thing that I want to point out here that is really important to remember, and Ryan pointed this out earlier as well, this all works fine and dandy, and these 10 years work as long as we grow by 5% every year, and our general fund does not grow by any more than 2.5% each year. If those numbers change, this whole spreadsheet changes. And so really making sure we're driving 5% in development that we used to use 6%. When I started, Sartell was using 6%. We used that for a couple years. And then this last year was the first year that we adjusted to 5%, I think. Right? This last year to 2024, did it? No, just this last year. So that was part of the factor in 2025 of why you had less for CIP funds. We shrunk that from 6 to 5%. And then it ended up being 3.25% or 3 point, right around there. We do account for debt, and when we account for the debt, we're accounting for future plan debt as well. But just keep in mind, another factor that could really throw this off is if you add debt that you aren't planning for. So you want to be really planful on that. This is another way of looking at it. This one might look more familiar to you guys. This one we use in our budget spreadsheet every year. This is taken exactly from our 2025 budget spreadsheet. It's a little bit more visual way, not as complex as the last spreadsheet, but it's essentially showing you the same exact thing. It's showing you the general fund amount, debt service. We know that those are fairly set with a little bit of flexibility in the general fund, and then whatever is remaining going to capital funds. So the red area is what you want to focus on here. We want to see that grow. In 2025, it shrunk back down because of the additional 3 FTE, but then also because valuations were right around 3%. And then you might remember that year 2 union contract, that was almost $500,000 of it by adding a step 10 to that scale and reflecting that. One thing that I did, I just want to make sure I'm articulating this accurately to you guys here. So one of our goals here, as I mentioned, is to really grow this red area, which is the CIP funds. So if you look at this first circle, right when we initiated this plan, we were right around 8% for CIP funds. Then we managed to build it up to right around 15%. We had those 2 years of really strong valuations, built it up, nearly doubled it from the 8%. Then you look at this year and went back down to the 8% because of the reasons there. And then you can see as we go here by 2027 back up to 14. But really ultimately what we're trying to drive is that we're going to get to a place to where we're less reliant on that general fund being 75% of our overall, and you get to the end there where it's more of a 60-40 split between general fund and your CIP funds. Now, the really critical piece and the hardest part for your job and our jobs is doing that while not compromising your operations and your morale, day-to-day quality of service, what your residents expect out of that quality of service. And so that's where, this last year staff made the recommendation of we've got to get our police department fully staffed. It has to happen. Right now it is that was worth the reduction in CIP dollars to get us to a fully staffed level. There are going to be decisions along the way that council has to make where you have to decide where is that ROI so that we can meet that quality of service. The least amount of swings that we can have on that, the better.
Anna, in 12 or 13 years from 2021, 2022 to 2034, our general fund on here looks like it grows $4 million.
2.5% a year. Is that accurate, Rob?
Well, from 2026 to 2034 is 2.5% a year, but before that was more than, quite a bit more than 2.5%.
I guess I just think $4 million over that period of time is significant, whether it's 2.5% or not. That's where I'd love to see us all dig a little deeper to understand what efficiencies can be driven. How do we keep that general fund? Because if we can keep that general fund lower, we can obviously drive a lot more into the capital funds. Debt service, to your point earlier, is stagnant unless we take out more debt. But how do we get to a point, 2034, where instead of spending, I don't know, what is that, $5 million, $4 million there? How do we spend $5 or $6 million in capital funds to drive that down? Sauk Rapids had done a great job a decade ago of kind of putting some of that into the motion. where they got to a point where they could do a lot of cash jobs on their street funds. It was not taking out debt for a new road. They had some TIFs that came due and were super advantageous. So I'm not saying we're apples to apples, but I think that's where we can have our biggest impact is how do we get creative in that general fund, drive out some of those reoccurring costs with technology. I know one of the areas we focused on over the last few years was with ARPA dollars is getting into tech. So rather than a human actually collecting water meter readings and processing that, we can automate that.
And council, I mean, spot on to what Ryan's saying, making that general fund as level as possible. So that's part of what you see here of like not having these big swings where you're going up one year and then how do you keep that as level as possible? And frankly, because 75% of it is employment based, it's leveraging attrition, vacancy control, it's not hiring union employees that get locked into a union contract that you then you don't have as much flexibility with that employment then. It's, right now we all have an understanding that we will not be hiring for the next 2 to 3 years for sure. And it's really, really, really locking in that employment cost because that is 75% of this. It is the cost of hiring people. How do we use technology? How do we not backfill those positions if we can? Really, really assessing ROI of every single position that's hired. Now that we have our police department to a spot where we feel like we're really stable there, we have looked at those employment numbers and feel like we're in a really good spot. I know Sartell, if you talk about it in the region, they'll talk about how lean Sartell is, but I prefer to look at it as efficient. Like we work really, really hard with the people that we have here, and I feel good about where we're at. We needed police officers, we got them. We're in a really good spot employment-wise, and are only getting better because we are leveraging technology better. But that is going to be the key spot, is holding the line on employment. That is your biggest expense in that general fund. One thing I just kind of shared at the bottom there, you can just see how CIP funds, I mentioned on the previous spreadsheet, it's super easy to use those CIP funds to balance your budget out because that's the most flexible area. And so Sartell has gone through historically lots of swings in that. There was a year where they didn't put any, and then there was a year where it was 650,000. And it depends on what's happening in those years. So the more we can lower those swings and try to be consistent, the better it will be for us long term. Are CIPs 100% funded? No. It's typically your projects are always going to outweigh the amount of funds that you have available, but it's making sure that they are all documented and accounted for. Most often the constraints from our other policies limit the ability of our projects to be 100% funded. So when you heard that for 40 million, it's because we're documenting all of the needs, but we know that our policies will limit what we can actually do. But we'll get into some of that with some examples at the end. I just touch on a few other items here. My note that I had on this section was just if council can be, where we could really use and value your input the most is that year one, and now, as Ryan mentioned, year 1 and 2 with you guys being a council, it'll be for sure together for 2 years. It's so critical because that is our marching orders as a staff. We know that those are our projects that we want to do. It sets everything for what Rob's doing, but it also sets everything for any grants we're going after. Operationally, that year 1 and 2, making sure that we are really locked in on those is really critical. I mentioned this earlier, and I just wanted to list out some of the reasons why having a 10-year CIP and a financial management plan and how that affects our credit rating agency for bond rating. We are a AA rating. There are no outstate that are AAA ratings, although that will ultimately be our goal. But Rob and I have been working really hard to get to AA+. And this year, they were really impressed. Some of their greatest feedback was just around the improvements that we've made around fiscal responsibility and the planning efforts and financial management plan and how robust it is. It indicates that we are capable of supporting growth and infrastructure needs, and it allows for more favorable borrowing terms. So our goal is to get to that AA+. We're going to do it. And I think plans like this help us as long as we stick to it.
Did I see something in your information? It's based on household income too?
That's a factor of it, yeah. But they're comparing us to metro cities.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
I mean, cause surely we have to be.
Around here, we're higher, yeah, but they compare us to, they compare us
How
down
do
to,
we
yeah.
compare? Do you know what those numbers are roughly?
We're pretty low though. I mean, we're in like,
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
because it's household income, not household wealth,
Yeah.
right? And so I think while we've got a number of wealthy individuals in our community, they're not drawing an income per se. And so
It's one of
demonstrates-
our like biggest knocks whenever we go to, it's crazy, you wouldn't think of it in Sartell, but
Rob, we've got it on our website. For some reason, I want to say it's like 68,000.
Yeah, it's probably on our ClearGov transparency.
And I know Nikki puts it in a slide. I always like
Nikki
skim
should
past
know
it because
that.
it's so low that
I know, you don't want, it's like 5% lower than the state average or something, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a number in there that we are,
Yeah.
but it's because of how they look at that you know, it's
Okay.
because of what they're looking at for that number, but then they use that to determine our rating, and so, to Ryan's point earlier, like, we can't necessarily control what that income level is gonna be, but we can control this, we can control our financial planning and how we're, you know, perceived by those rating agencies.
Hopefully we're better than Wake Park.
Do you have it?
It's our median household income is 74,177.
Which is 12% below the state median.
that to me seems.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
But is that Sartell specifically, or is that a local MSA?
That is, I believe that's Sartell specific. They pull it from the,
Same as the local MSA too, because you have an MSA here, you have an MSA in the cities that sounds more, but that's right about the MSA for the local.
they pull it straight from the census, and it always blows my mind when I see that number.
I love I mean, I want us to be AAA. What is the actual impact of us being AA versus AA plus?
Interest rate.
Right, but to what extent? Are we talking?
Well, obviously it depends on the par amount of the bonds. I don't know. I could ask our municipal advisors to see what impact that would
What you
have
actually
on
gain from
interest
that.
rate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want us to stop chasing it.
Yeah.
But I want us to understand what we are like. What's the benefit of chasing it, right? And so as we talk about trade-offs,
Mm-hmm.
let's understand what we get once we get there. And if it's like, hey, that doesn't have a material impact, then let's still strive for it, but let's not.
Right.
Well,
I
and
guess
what
forego
cost,
some other
right?
things.
They get
Yeah.
what cost, what, you know, and then what benefit, right? So I love to do analysis there for sure.
And our last bond would be great. The last one we pulled.
Yeah, what would we
Hey,
gotten
had that
at?
been a AA plus, what would the impact be? It's real time.
Yeah, do you wanna make a note of that? We can, now's a good time to ask, cause we just
Mhm.
went out for it, so. So really my point here is just stressing, understanding what those trade-offs are, but just stressing the importance of this planning for our rating agencies. So let's pull it all together. We've talked about CIP a lot. You guys saw the complex spreadsheet that kind of started to pull it together, but understanding it all as it comes into a 0% tax rate in our financial management plan. So when we go through that roadmap, the next June workshop is gonna be to specifically look at the balance sheets of every single CIP fund and then look at the overall CIP spreadsheet. And then you're gonna start to work your way into the financial management plan, which incorporates all of this into one spot. The CIP is one piece of the financial management plan, but not the whole thing. So within the CIP, we have to account for the fund reserves, which is where you saw that true and false at the bottom. We're also trying to monitor debt sufficiency in our debt policy there because some of the revenue sources for CIP projects are debt. So that's your CIP funds. Another piece of your financial management plan is going to be accomplishing operational strategies that council's added. Right now they were listed in our ends policy for policy governance. We'll have to go through those and make sure which ones we want to keep. But things like, you know, single points of failure is a high priority. Public safety response time is in there. Park ratios of acreage per person, things like that are strategic initiatives that council wants to reach. That's part of your financial management plan. And then it also brings in the enterprise, your business accounts. So the financial management plan then brings in sewer, water, and stormwater funds, which we've not talked about because they're not CIP funds. Those are separate. One thing I have an asterisk there, and I wanted to just put a plug out there, is that we never really quite know where to target for utility rates. And we think after this last discussion that like 8% is your top tolerance rate, but it feels like we have a financial policy for every other, you know, we have our guidelines in every other area, but not on utility rates, and that could be something that council could look into. That it gives us great guidance of knowing, don't bring us something over X%, whatever that might be. But it would be it might be something for us to consider, because to date we've not had a financial policy around that. Okay, so then we wanted to go through a couple interactive tax rate spreadsheet examples, and I realize interactive is there's only so much we can do for interactive because your computer screens aren't touch or anything, but we wanted to play out a couple different scenarios for you guys, knowing that we have quite a few road projects, and how do we get caught up on those? We can only recommend to you things that are within policy. So any one of these scenarios plays out a scenario where we'd be out of policy, and we just want to walk through each one of them so you can see how does that, when you change some assumptions, what does that look like? And if there's scenarios that we haven't run but you'd like to run, just let us know, because Rob can run them through his spreadsheets. So let's talk about first scenario. I realize it's really small in there. We summarized it on the side. So under this scenario, it's a more aggressive plan to address the streets and close that $25 million gap by leveraging $4 million in additional debt for every future planned debt issuance. So you're planning to go out for debt already. We're planning for that debt that we're going out for already. What happens if we had $4 million to each one of those issuances specifically to get into the street fund and work on these projects? So you can see we will take on $20 million more in debt. You see the levy increase. It's approximately 2 to 3% per year of each of the issuances. Doesn't have it moves our target debt policy date to 2033 from 2032, so not as much of a debt policy impact, but obviously a tax rate increase. Now keep in mind, there's a few things not accounted for here, or accounted for. This is assuming 2.5% in your general fund increase. This is assuming a 5% growth rate. So let's say there's a year where it's higher, your 2 to 3% tax rate wouldn't be as much because you have more growth. We also are not accounting for, when we talk about the debt, we're not accounting for special assessments. So there's a revenue value there that would probably impact that 2 to 3%. It maybe wouldn't be quite as high. And then there's also a few things that you just can't predict. So like, let's say we sell property at Mill District or the rest of Champion Plat, and you have an infusion of money into that street fund. That will affect what that 2 to 3% is as well. But just wanted to pose that as a, hey, if you really want to get caught up on these streets, here's an option. Not the only option. Here's an option. We'd be out of compliance in a few different areas, but it does allow us to have at least a plan for closing that debt. Ultimately, it could still be council's direction to say, we want to do this, but we'd still really like to see the 0% tax rate.
Hey Rob, super quick question. On this scenario, 2030, you moved it from 5% to 6%.
Oh, that's the Tobin Merrill TIF falling off.
Oh, okay.
In 2029, and them being on the tax base.
So that equals a 1%.
Approximately, yeah, roughly.
I was just wondering why we were introducing additional variables into the model.
Oh, right, yeah. That is one variable where I thought it was noteworthy
Yep, good call.
to make an assumption change there.
Scenario 2 is somewhat of a similar model, except for instead of debt, you're infusing money into the street fund from levy dollars. So infuse 500,000. Impact would be 2.5 million over 5 years, 5 million over 10 years. It's only a third of the gap, and by doing it this way, you have almost double the potential tax rate increase. Where on the debt side, you're just accounting for the debt payments instead of the full 500,000. To completely close that gap, you'd need to triple that. And so this doesn't seem like an option that council would probably want to entertain, which is why I presented the debt option. But we wanted to just show you what happens when you change some of those variables. So this is what happens and why it's so important that you control that general fund. What happens if general fund gets out of control and it goes to 5%, which is traditionally how most cities budget. They go to that general fund and that levy, and whatever that increase is, they then move down to their tax rate increase. We reverse it and we start at 0% and work off of that bucket of money. But you can see what that can do fairly quickly. I mean, it is 7.6% over 3 years. Yeah, it gives you an extra 600,000 each year in funds, but it's a substantial tax rate increase. So we're not suggesting this, we just are showing it, just to be clear. This is the area, the next two scenarios are what Ryan was talking about earlier of how much growth do we want to project. So right now we're at 5%. That's based on, we took out the years of, we had 2 years of, the 17% and the 9% that were anomalies, and figured out what is our 5-year average of growth. When you take out those anomalies, it was at 5.25%. We went a little bit lower, and we're right now projecting 5% each year. But what happens if we were to adjust that to 4% each year instead of 5%? It would mean an almost 3% tax rate increase, and or we would have to figure out how to remove $650,000 from our overall bucket of money. So we know debt's set. We know 75% of your general fund is set. It likely is going to be CIP funds and or a result in staffing reductions that you'd have to be pretty strategic about with the union contracts. It'd be tough to come up with $650,000 in reductions without it mostly affecting CIP funds. Now on the reverse, if you assume a tax base increase at 6% each year and assumed higher, which is what we were doing before, you could project out that you're going to have lower tax rates and you're going to have more money. But where this catches up to you is that if you don't hit that 6%, you've now underprojected your valuation, or you've overprojected your valuations, and you don't actually have as much money available to you. And as you're getting each year, you're having to cut and cut and cut. This happened last year. We were projecting 5%. We were at 3.25. So then you have 1.5% that you're having to cut somewhere. So we would rather be more conservative here. Of note, I put in my notes, and I'm not sure if that made any sense to you guys, but we also are doing this on the general fund side of projecting more conservatively. So we used to project building permit revenue based on trends, and we adjusted that to a flat percent growth each year in hopes that we're being really, really conservative. We know that it's likely going to supersede what that amount is. However, we'd rather end up in a surplus. It helps us for rating agencies. We can end up in that surplus. Surplus helps us adjust that overall reserve balance that we want. We want between 40 and 60%. So we're trying to really get that to be, middle range. We're right around 45% now. We wanted to put some money in a compensated absences bank to put funds aside. But the more that we can be conservative in budgeting on the revenue projections, if we can end up in that surplus, eventually we're going to get to a spot where those surplus dollars can go back into your CIP at year end. So when we have strong building permit years, which is where we've been ending lately, we can take that money and infuse it back. It's kind of like a reverse CIP budgeting, but we need to have a few years of surplus to get our percent up, and then also we wanted to build that compensated absences bank. Now this year, we budgeted conservatively on building permit revenue. We ended, you'll see in the audit when we present, right around 600,000 surplus. So it moves our percent to right around 45%, which is a really healthy amount. We feel good about that, while also putting some funds in a compensated absence and bank. So we're getting there. We just need a couple years of that.
Colts, I know most all of us know this, but I think just a reminder of how the decisions we make here dramatically impact it. It's probably 2015 we started a big boom on apartments in Sartell. And people at the time, I think, were really becoming reliant upon that year-over-year growth. Think of multifamily, significant tax increase, also significant whack and sack fees collected. Got to a point, it was probably 2019, where we put a moratorium, council at the time put a moratorium on multifamily. That had a significant impact on our projected growth rate for future years, right? And so as we limit those, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but as we limit certain classifications within our community, we're stifling some growth. Again, that can be positive, negative, but it has a direct impact to what our year-over-year future projections can be, will be. And so I just, again, as we're holistically talking about not making decisions in a vacuum, one tonight we brought a property in as R3. That will hopefully positively help our projections in the future. But if a future council decides to put a moratorium on something or halt something, we'll draw down those projections.
Yeah, excellent point. And our hope is that after tonight, that those is, some of the things that start to kind of click a little bit as we've done like more of a comprehensive. Just wanted to show you, what does it look like if you do a 1% tax rate every year and the infusion of that money, and then it builds on itself. And so you could account for some street projects that way as well. I know that that's not desired, but we wanted to at least lay it out of what does that look like as a scenario. 6.5 million in 10 years. So it gets you a third of what that gap is. So the other thing, Rob and I really put our heads together and we wanted to make sure that we walked away tonight and council walked away tonight with understanding what are the key takeaways and things that council can do to really help drive this plan, guide it, own it, give us directionality within it. And so we listed a few of them here, and Ryan just said one of probably, if not the most important, one of the most important key pieces. We need 5% growth every year. So we need that while also not waiving things and holding the general fund at 2.5%. That's what our projections are at right now. And so hold that general fund at 2.5%. We're committed to that as a team, but we want council to join us on that, and I'm confident you will be. Try not to waive. Oh, go ahead.
To Anna's point on that, we've got two big projects that are gonna happen in our community. Mm-hmm. None of which are gonna impact this for at minimum 6 years, right? So again, like, it's that but-for test. Had we not made those concessions, we wouldn't be able to enjoy it 6 years from now.
But we gotta get there.
It's a real decision that I think at times it's easy for us to take lightly, but putting the finances to it, those are big decisions that have a big impact on us.
And so then we wanted to take this a notch further, and we've never done this before. I'm hoping it's going to be really helpful for us as you guys consider plans and decisions that come in meeting after meeting. So we met with Carrie before she went out, and we're looking at numbers and, okay, what's 5% growth actually mean in projects for council that you're reviewing? And it's approximately $30 million in project valuations if a little over half of them are not residential. Higher valuation, not residential. We bring in about 10 million in residential a year, depending on the prices of the homes and permits. And so when you're reviewing plans, and you saw my asterisk up there of, try not to waive fees and assessments with an asterisk, because if you see a project come in that's gonna generate utility fee payments for our enterprise funds, it's gonna be park dedication fees, it's development fees, it's building permit fees, it's future tax base, it's job growth, and it's gonna get us to our 5%, and you're noticing we're below that, that might be a good time to waive an assessment because we need to incentivize development at that point. We need to get to that 5% growth. And so what Carrie's gonna do going forward in her monthly report is track that valuation number for you of both pending and submitted. So right now I had her run before she left. We have 6.954 million in paid submitted permit valuations so far this year. And we have 3.2 roughly in the pending category. So if you look at that for 2025 numbers, if you're trying to hit 5% growth, which is what our projections are, we're, as of today, about $20 million short for development that we need to see for tax-based growth in 2025.
So we need 30 million in new projects each year. What about the growth in the existing tax base? How does that play into it?
So that's being accounted for. It's
You're
building
already
off of it in
accounting
this
for it.
projection. Yep.
Okay, so how much are you accounting for that? You're saying the existing tax base will increase how much each year?
5%.
But that accounts for our 5% then without the $30 million in risks.
It's tough to nail down like an exact formula, but I think what we did is we looked at actuals, like historically,
and how they matched up. Because you also have to keep in
The
mind that
correlation.
the county assessor's aspect of this too that can fluctuate this.
Yeah, because that is a huge component of our tax base is what they do for existing residential and commercial, as you mentioned. So that's a
Right,
key
so
factor.
I'm just, yeah, we don't need, or maybe we do need, that's what I'm asking the question of, do we need $30 million of new projects every year to hit 5% growth? Or does the existing tax base not increase 3 to 5% each year?
Typically, no,
Depends on the-
not the 3 to 5% for existing.
When's the last year we hit 30 million in new growth?
You have those.
I have a list here, so I was gonna, somebody's gotta track this while I'm going through these. I'm gonna go back to Pat's point. Let's go, got too many things here. I don't know if you guys can even read this, but can you follow the tax rate? So 2020, we had 32.1 million. Is 2020 on there?
No.
Okay, 2021, we had 50.9 million.
So in that year, so then it would be 2 years.
2 years forward. So if you take 2020, 2 years forward would be 2022. What was our valuation in 2022 on there? Because 2020 was 32.1 million in projects.
Total capacity is 18.9.
What was
And that's what we're really driving towards, right? Is
Exactly.
our tax capacity.
Yep.
Right, but yeah, so you got the blue line, the total tax base increase, and for this year, it's 3.25%. But that includes an increase in the existing tax base valuation.
And we don't, that the county sets, so it's,
No, I do
Yeah.
understand the county sets it, and that's
So we're maybe a little
macro-
aggressive on the 30
macroeconomic
million.
trends that we can't control,
Mhm.
but it still accounts for a significant portion, I would think.
so 2023, which would be 2023, 2 years later is when you see the actual, real tax base benefit. Our 2023 permit valuations was 23.3 million. So then 2025's rate was 3.25% based on that. So that's where we were like, we gotta go a little bit above that, because if in 2023 it was 23.3 million,
But, sorry, our effective tax rate's 41%. And so if we're saying 30 million needs to come in net new every year,
in building permit valuations.
which equates to 30 million of tax capacity, right?
Depending on how they assess it.
Sure. I mean, as long as the assessor says that's $1 million home and the permit says it's $1 million home. But each year, if let's just play that out so we take out the variables. If we bring in $30 million 2 years from now, at the effective tax rate of 41% on that 30 million, it's $12.3 million
So
in
the
tax we're bringing in.
tax capacity for residential is 1% of the market value of a home. So one home at $250,000, tax capacity is 2,500. So it's a little bit. The tax capacity is a little
Isn't the
bit-
true valuation.
isn't yeah
Right,
It's a percentage
It's a
of
percent
the
market value.
market value.
yeah.
And you said residential is 1?
Yeah, commercial is different. Industrial is a little bit different.
Okay, that's where I was getting confused on that.
On the percent, on that, yeah, it's not a straight 40,
Okay.
No, I was just trying to figure out too, because I mean, the existing tax base can grow too. as
and that's what
opposed
you
to
saw
this
in
new
23 and 24,
Right,
yep.
I can't remember the last time my tax assessment didn't go up 3% minimum.
Yeah.
I mean, and just like everybody else, just like our 17% we saw in 23, I mean, I heard all sorts of grumbling from everybody around town saying, what the hell is going on
Yeah.
with my valuation?
And now what's wild to that point is, personally, I've not seen my tax valuation go down. Our 2024 permits is 56.2 million. That's what we have for 2024. So you would presumably think in 2026, we all got our tax state, our estimated, they're all going up,
Right.
mine is.
Yep.
They're projecting, the county gave us early indication of our tax capacity, and they said growth of 3.25.
Yeah, and I'm I'm working with the county, and I think that
Like,
number
how
is
is that?
based on like existing residential market value increases, not necessarily
Not taking
incorporating
into
growth.
Like they have to be not including the new.
Yeah, I've been trying to pull a number from that, because they usually provide it to me this early in the year, but I think they're changing systems or having some turnover or whatever else. But I'm trying to nail down a number for 2026, because that is gonna dictate, what we have the levy capacity for. And I haven't gotten anything yet, so I'll keep pushing. Hopefully by next meeting, we'll have a better indication.
But it just seems odd to me. I'm like, that can't be right. We had almost 60 million in permits,
Mhm.
and everybody's valuations are going up.
Yeah.
But we tried, like I said, we've never done this before, but we were just trying to give council like a target as you're reviewing plans and thinking about, if you're thinking about waiving fees or waiving assessments, it's how do you have a real number of what are we trying to hit here? Are we trying to, and you can, all things considered, it's hard to know what the county's gonna do on assessed values, but somewhere between that 25 and 30 feels like a sweet spot. If you can have over half of it be commercial and industrial, that's gonna be or multifamily, that's gonna be the critical spot. And so, like, we know right now that there's a project at the corner of Heritage and Fourth that would be almost a, $10-15 million influx into our tax base for this year. We need to get that locked in for 2025 to hit our 5%. So how do we motivate and incentivize and get development to hit that 5% every year?
Yeah, on that topic, I very much appreciate the future insight on that. I think that's an area where not all projects are created equal, right? We've got parcels out there that have significant financial liability on them for past assessments that would, once they come to fruition, they would pay those past assessments plus create the value ongoing. Anything Carrie can do to give us that insight, I mean, she's given us the economic development updates.
She is going to start
Those aren't
putting
equal.
in her monthly reports, and then including as she's bringing projects to you, what are we at?
That's where I think it's more critical is the projects. I think all of us have extensive networks, and if we know that there's a project that can have significant financial impact for us, how do we rally around and support Carrie to bring that to a shovel in the ground? Because they're not all equal.
And to your comment about multifamily, is for council to understand where are we at on that 5%, because that is a massive tax valuation increase that we might be at a spot where it's time to pull that lever and say, yep, we want to drive that development because we want to hit that 5%. You may be in, like last year we had the massive Sauk Crossings permit, and so it wasn't at a point where we necessarily needed to pull a trigger on a multifamily unit. And so, Ryan, you hit it on the nail. They're not all created equal. It's monitoring that permit valuation, which we've never done before. It's not the number of permits. It is what is the value of what we're bringing in and hitting that 5% growth as close as we possibly can. And I don't know that we've ever really tried to control that in some of the projects we're doing. And so leveraging Carrie for that, using that as a part of our methodology when we bring projects to you of like, yep, this deferred assessment is worth waiving. We're going to still get park dedication. We're going to get development fees, but we're going to get that 5% tax base, which is really, now that we've walked through all of this and shared with you the assumptions we're making, 2.5% on general fund, hold the line, 5% growth. Like those are the two biggest pieces that council can help drive. Hitting that 5% growth, if we don't hit that, that has major impacts down the road, and it's 2 years down the road that it hits us. So helping us there was something, just a creative option that we wanted to try to help frame up for you guys, and we'll continue moving that dial as we bring things forward. And then a couple things that we put in here too is just, consistent messaging of, we're working on these projects, we're chipping away on them, it's a long-term initiative, check out our projects and performance site, like we have them all out there on a prioritization order. Sartell grew by, I'm gonna get this number, I don't have it today, Hunter's working on it, but Sartell grew by X number of miles of roadways in a 10-year window. They are all coming due at the same time. Like, how do we just make sure we message that communication out there really consistently to people and share that collectively? Another really key piece is for council to thoughtfully consider or don't consider adding projects to our CIP that aren't on there. Like mid-year ads are really hard for us to absorb. This includes, and you guys caught this at the last stoplight discussion, it includes feasibility studies, because feasibility studies are our trigger to put it on the CIP. And so if you don't actually intend to do that project, don't pay for a feasibility study and put it on our CIP. Focus on the 1 year, and as we heard tonight, 1 to 2 years. This is a really important point too. Carefully balance the quality of services and overall morale and employment. And we know we want to hold the line on the general fund, but at the same point, we have to be careful that it doesn't come at the cost of people saying, I'm out, I'm not a part of this anymore. Like there's that balance of, I can no longer provide that quality of service. We were feeling that with the police department last year on only having one officer on certain shifts, and that was the point where it was like, we have to balance this better. And then, as always, ask questions. We're gonna try to do a better job, and we're committed to doing a better job of providing more of the why and the specific data behind the levers that we're showing, so that it doesn't feel like it's in a vacuum. I hope tonight helped to try to pull that all together too, but don't be always, as always, don't be afraid to ask questions. We talked about some of these key tactics as we went through, and you can see it's already in the projections. When debt expires, we roll that over into CIP funds. When TIFs expire, keep in mind that TIF 5-7 is based on today's projections, will likely not go the full 9 years and would expire in 2032, which is approximately $300,000 influx into our tax base. Our current deferred assessments balance is $3.1 million, so trying not to waive these unless, again, it's hitting that 5% growth. And reinvest that back into CIP funds. When your tax rate does go up and it's above what you're projecting, reinvest that into CIP funds. Those are just some tactics that we wanted to share with council. And then just key directionality from council is just helping to give us directionality of like, yep, you're on the right path. This is, I think we all agree that what we're projecting out here makes sense. We want to hold the general fund. We want to build CIP funds. We want to aim for that 5% growth. Like we're all on the same page on that, because that will then frame up what we're bringing forward for future workshops. One last thing, this didn't come out to you earlier. Hunter's working on it for me. This blows my mind. These are all of the new roadways that were completed in Sartell between 1995 and 2010. Hunter, when he sent it to me, said, I think it might have been easier for me to just pick the roads that have been done since 2010 because it's the whole map. Color coded, the green are the earlier ones, so those are your 1995 to 2000. Point of context, 1999 to 2001 was some of the highest boom, and then we saw another one in the late 2000s, like 2007 to 2010. So we broke this up into 3 chunks. Green is the earlier 95 to 2000. Pink, I think, I can't read that far away, is the next 5 years, and then orange is the next 5 years. What we're trying to do, Hunter's trying to measure the actual miles of roadway, because it is phenomenal to me how many new roadways were constructed during the periods of massive growth. And Ryan mentioned it earlier that we were growing during all the consistent services and everything that these roads demand were all carrying on during that time, while also doing things like a moratorium. Well, I mean, these roads were still there. You still had to take care of them. The other really critical piece, you guys all know that Patty's one of my greatest mentors, and I love picking her brain. And I think we lose sight of what happened in 2012 and the impact that had on this financial plan. When the paper mill exploded in 2012, you instantly lost a $300,000 tax base that they were accounting for to do these roads. That was snap of a finger, but not just tax base. You also lost the same, if not more, in enterprise influx to your funds. So while all these roads are getting done, the city's growing, they're permanent. They're not going anywhere. And then you lose this massive tax base. Now, 14 years later, we're finally recapturing that. And just the catastrophic impact, when you look at this map, it's like, holy cow.
The other item that I would call out that I think has a dramatic impact is that venture to say with 99% certainty that all of the green and pink were, and part of the orange, were city-funded roads. And so prior to 08, 09, it was very common for municipalities to put, I'll look at Celebration there because it's bright. The city would pay to put in the road and then assess that back and collect it back. And that worked really well until the 08 bust, when Sabre Oaks, I think it is, up off 27 is one that,
Across from the high school.
kitty corner from high school, Oak Ridge. That one in particular was a Goulet project that the city funded, and then 08 bust, and the city was left holding the bill, because there's no one that's gonna, all those properties went to foreclosure. There's some current conversation, the last CMBA quarterly meeting that the mayors attended, there's some conversation within that building community group of what would it look like if we got back to the point where, rather than a developer coming in and having to put all the money up front to pay for the roads, what if a city were able to do that and assess it back? It'll be interesting to watch as that ask grows legs in maybe other communities. But that is what drove a lot of development in this area, is it was limited risk on the developer at the time, and most of the risk was on the city.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but that is a really key piece of this too. So I think that number of miles will be really interesting, just because it helps share that message of, hey, this is how much it grew. You can talk population all day long, and we can all conceptualize, yeah, we all know this, but when you actually put a miles of roadway to that, it's like, whoa, look at this. I mean, no wonder why we're backlogged. I mean, they're all coming due at the same time because they all got built at the same time. So just an interesting visual. We haven't quite decided what to do with it, and if we want to share it, I think the miles will be really interesting to share as a narrative piece. But just thought you guys might find this interesting. Lastly, just to wrap this up, where are we going? Next stop is going to be the workshop in June, where we'll get into the actual specifics of every single balance sheet. That's where you guys look at years 1 and 2, make sure that we are aligned on those projects. And then you'll see as we work our way to the 0% tax rate preliminary levy at the September regular meeting. So come ready for this next one to talk about project priorities, deep dive into them. It's our goal that by the time we get to this end September meeting, which is really December by the time final levy, but when you set 0%, you can't go up. Our hope, our goal, hope's not a strategy, our goal, our intent is that when we get to September, you're gonna look back on this and say, that was a really thorough process, and I get it. That's gonna happen. So, I hope tonight was valuable. I hope it's connected some dots. And if it's not, I'm here to answer questions. I enjoyed pulling this together. Both Rob and I spent a lot of time on it, and our goal is that you feel like you're making decisions comprehensively and not in a vacuum. So, we'll share this as a training mechanism with future department heads, future councils, but we're excited to dive into the details come June. Questions?
Good job.
That was a long. Thanks for hanging with me.
Can you go back to the part about the CIP?
No. Done. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next up is sign ordinance.
I'm sitting down for this one. Council, we've had some discussion, or some of us have had some discussion on this item, specifically as it relates to a violation along Pine Cone. Know that one is going to be resolved by the end of the month, but it brought up a larger conversation of, is our ordinance right? Are we doing this right? Should we be thinking about the fines differently? Should we be thinking about the ordinances differently? So I had Jill who manages this process, just lay out for us in layman's terms, what's the violation process, what are the fines, who are some of, how many are we experiencing this with? We do have some people who just choose to pay the fine because the advertising is worth it to them. And I think you can kind of see from this list, I asked her today, it looks like there's a theme. It's a lot of corporate. There's a theme here, help me understand what you're experiencing as you're sending these violations. Staff changes, she said that's probably the biggest one, is that they don't realize someone new starts and they don't realize there's an ordinance. And then the other big thing she said is that in the grand scheme of things, the dollar amount is pretty minor to some of these corporations. $100 fine, that advertising is more worth it to them than what that fine is. And it's in a 2-year period, so keep that in mind. So it builds on itself, and we don't go backwards until that 2-year period expires. So if that staff changes over, they got a $100 fine, and a year later somebody new comes in, and then it's already $200. It doesn't start over. But just wanted to bring forward the temporary sign ordinance. I should clarify, it's the temporary sign ordinance. It's the banners, it's the signs that we have a greater risk of being visual clutter, disorderly. They get tattered, they get torn, they blow in the wind. I think that was the real spirit and intent of it. Nikki, I think sharing from a business perspective, I'd say that this ordinance by far is what I hear the most complaints about. I know I went on a couple BRE visits with Anita when I was on Everything Sartell shortly after this ordinance was drafted, and it's a balance, because there's businesses that definitely feel like this is too restrictive and it's a bit of an overreach. But in the same breath, the intent of it was, you see here, it's like preventing conditions that are going to lead to visual clutter and disorderly appearance. So how do you find that sweet spot? And you work with them more than I certainly do.
Yeah, Council, I would say that of generally speaking, people really enjoy being in Sartell, but this is the one that I do get the most complaints about. They think it's the most restrictive. Take or leave. And once I kind of explain the reasoning, which is kind of the keeping the visually appealing and all that, they get it. I would say another reason that they might violate it is because they're in other communities that don't have as restrictive ordinances, and I would say in the area we're probably the most restrictive. But again, just it got me thinking a little more about maybe what would help them, and maybe it's education, maybe it's a more formal permitting process around it. I just think about K-Power Yoga, when they came in, they put up black signs every day, and they were like, in Sauk Rapids we don't have any of these ordinances. So just truly they didn't know. And so I do think it's an issue that they would appreciate it being looked at, but that's just kind of the feedback that I've heard over the years.
That's one point that Jill had mentioned too, is that some of these, if they have multiple locations, that's where it gets the most difficult. And Jed, you can probably speak to this or Rusty, yeah, you do, whatever's allowed in Sartell, and then all of a sudden what's not allowed in Sauk Rapids, and the staff don't know that, and that's where it gets really hard.
I mean, I remember the Gold's Gym days where we would just pay the fine, and then we would try to get crafty and put the black sign on the back of a vehicle and say it's not permanent, and just move it around every once in a while.
And Stayfoot was one that I happened to overhear the conversation.
Yeah.
They really truly think that this advertising makes a big impact on the bottom line. And I don't run a business, I don't know what that impact is, but it really truly is I'd rather pay the fine because it's worth it that much to me. I think especially when you get out by the Highway 15, County Road 1 corridor, where there's the traffic counts up there. I have asked a couple other city administrators, what are you guys doing? And either they don't do anything, which I think we see when we drive around. I don't know that we want that. But it brings some, not around here, but you go to the metro and it makes me think of the carrot or the stick. Right now we're the stick. We are fining and we're punishing. there is a concept that other cities use, and Nikki just mentioned it, of maybe we create a carrot model where you permit them, then you get to control what's the messaging. You can deny certain messaging that we think is inappropriate. And maybe you say you get one temporary sign permit a year, or, you know.
We already
And,
have
and
that,
I
though.
thought that's,
We allow temporary signs per our ordinance.
So there are black signs that are allowed, but only for community events.
Right, the black signs, but I think, Nikki, I didn't read the entire ordinance, but I'm almost certain you can get 3 temporary permits a year, I believe.
I know
Yeah.
that's true with the black signs. Maybe I
I'm
guess
almost positive
Okay.
that, I mean, unless it's changed,
Are there
cause I
s-
was gonna say, I think you can,
maybe it's
we-
certain signage.
well, we would use, I mean, again, 10 years ago, we would use it up November, December, and January, and then we're like, oh, we can't do any
Yeah.
signs again this year.
I think this whole conversation here in the last 30 seconds tells me that we need to revisit this, right? We don't,
We don't even know.
I'm not pointing
Yeah.
fingers, but we don't know what the ordinance actually says,
Yeah.
so how do we apply it? How do we expect our business owners or leaders to know it? I think it's both. I think we need to outline, like, what are the things that we, from a sign perspective, that we don't want, we believe aren't additive to our community. I don't think too many people want the blow up thing that looks like fingers or a person jumping around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we restrict the items we don't want and have a repercussion that's impactful? 'Cause today it's not.
Right.
But then also, how do we make it on the things that we do want but have oversight of? How do we make that super easy to the point where it's free, just creating engagement, or not even at all? I'm not sure, but I think you got to have both the carrot and the stick on that.
I mean, maybe it's something where, you know, they pay $500 for 3 sign permits a year if they think they're gonna use them. And,
some substantial
yeah, and,
revenue here.
yeah, and if you think you're gonna use more than that, maybe it's $1,000, something like that, but give them guidelines. I agree, I don't think we need the streamers and then they get ripped down and from an aesthetic standpoint, but yeah, there's obviously a lot of businesses that I know that have talked about it before.
And I will tell you, Jill, I swear she can smell these. Like, if somebody puts it up, she knows this ordinance by the back of her hand, and those violations are going out instantly. I wasn't following her when she was driving down Pinecone when the 3 key signs went up, but somebody else was, and they were like, she almost drove off the road, because she is that passionate about it. But I will also say, they are upset.
It's beat up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, I was on the council last time we did the sign ordinance. I know a lot of blood, sweat, and tears were exhausted on this because, yes, getting the wide range of commercial businesses and what their needs might be, and to get a sign ordinance like this, it's not easy to get consensus on that, and we'll never get everybody agreeing with what we adopt, but we do have a sign ordinance, and I'm reading right here, you can get commercial temporary signs, you can get an annual permit 3 times a year for 15 consecutive days, each of 3 times a year. So we do allow for the temporary signs, and I guess I don't think this needs to be reworked, I really don't. I think it probably needs to be enforced. I think it's not fair to the businesses that play by the rules, that some people don't play by the rules. And so, I don't know, I'd like to find a way to toughen up the enforcement somehow, so that we don't have this hodgepodge. And I understand what you're saying about, it might be different in each city, okay, but let's talk to the manager, this is what it is in Sartell. It's really not a difficult concept.
One thing to point out with that, they can get permitted, but they have to be a permanent rigid material, so that's the big difference.
They have to what?
They have to have a permanent material, it says permanent rigid material. So signs of a non-permanent nature such as plastic banners, poster boards, cardboard, they're not allowed, period. So for example, let's just play that out of the banners that are all
Yeah.
along the fence line. An option that could have been taken in that is that they all are made out of a permanent material and then they can hang.
But is it a permanent material, wouldn't that become a permanent sign? And we're talking a temporary sign ordinance? I mean, I'm just saying, like, as you move the material to be permanent,
And that's where I think it gets
Yeah.
confusing for
Yeah.
people, right? Is like this language is,
and that's just why I think we need to spend time actually, not in workshop, but in council, making some fine tunes to it. Cause, yes, I mean, all of our businesses, I think what makes a lot of business owners successful is they know how to MacGyver through ordinances. Great. Let's not make it difficult for them. Let's then communicate out what that ordinance is so that people know how to apply it.
Do we wanna refer this to a planning commission discussion, or are you thinking purely council led, or are you thinking just the fine side, or? Cause then that would be fee schedule, I mean, you could make an adjustment in the fee schedule.
sounds like Rusty knows all the ways.
The
to
ins and
go
outs.
around it.
Put it on a vehicle.
We had to get creative.
I think timeframes are the biggest thing. It sounds like they're in there. I think applying for permits, I think people would pay for revenue. I think the fines, when they're not following the rules, need to be big enough where it deters them from doing that, so we can enforce it. I think is really important.
That's probably our biggest gap right now, is we maybe need to just increase those fine amounts.
And I think maybe the description of the signs is a little overkill to a certain degree. I mean, I don't know a lot of businesses that are gonna put advertising up that makes them look worse.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing it for a reason, right? I think when it looks bad, it's usually when they get to stay up for 8 months and they just got bad,
Yeah, the weather.
right? So I think sometimes we might have we can put a cardboard so people aren't
Yeah.
stapling things on the light posts, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that we have the time frame and applying and then a fine. So it sounds like we have the bare bones there, but, you know, something has to deter people if they choose to not follow the ordinance.
I mean, we'll have to call a public hearing to make the change to the ordinance. Are there others that we can bundle with that? So that we can call a broad,
I did the bonding one, it's city bonding, which maybe probably we haven't quite heard yet. I think it might have been last year before.
Yeah. You and I were talking about
You
it.
and I did talk about it, so, it hasn't been high on my priority list, but should try to get it done this
Well,
summer.
and I was also thinking about inspections. Once don't we have some ordinance changes we need to make with fire inspections, rental inspections? No, we just had to do that. Oh, yeah, we did that.
Are the fines spelled out in the ordinance?
Sorry, I'm just trying to
should,
make Jill hear this.
$150.
Yeah, and then I think it might actually keep it general in the ordinance and refers to our fee schedule is what I'm thinking.
That's what I was gonna recommend, that they should
Yeah, you
probably
want
be
a
part of
fee
a fee schedule rather
Because
than
then you
ordinance,
increase
cause
it every year.
exactly,
Yep.
without a public hearing. Yeah.
well, but to adjust our fee schedule, we'll also have to have a public hearing. So. if-
Right, but we do actually review that every year, so.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have it
Really.
anyways, yep.
I'd
And
like to.
it sounds like there's gonna be some edits that we wanna make here, so are we thinking like, we wanna review it at a workshop level?
I think if we can all take that as a homework assignment and sometime in June have it on the agenda that we could talk through at a council. Our proposed, cause again,
On a regular or workshop?
well, our workshop have been guided that it's educational, right? I think we're gonna wanna make a motion to act on something, to make some level of change. Depending on how detailed or any actions we wanna take, would then preempt that a public hearing needs to take place or doesn't need to take place. Right, council may say, hey, we should adjust the fee schedule on this to make it more impactful. But maybe we're comfortable letting that go to the next fee schedule review, right? Versus, hey, do we need to do it now?
Yeah, cause then you have to do a public hearing.
Yeah, and so I just think there's multiple avenues this could go. And I don't know if anyone's prepared tonight to offer amendments.
So the
Jim wants
did
to
you
score.
say, Rusty, did you say the dollar amounts or?
Yeah, I thought it was 150. I can't.
She's got it written on.
I can't
here.
remember if
Got it
that
written
was
there,
the
but I don't think it's
fee
actually in
or-
the ordinance.
No, I think it just refers to the fee schedule.
Fee schedule. Which would be the right way to do it.
Yeah, I do agree with that approach, because then you can adjust it every year annually, move it with inflation. If we're not driving the change that we wanna see, we can be strategic about those as well.
Yeah, I personally don't think the sign ordinance is broke, and I think I think you're gonna open up a can of worms if you try to change the sign ordinance in any significant way. I think the way to deal with the people who don't follow it is, like what Jed said,
Enforce
just
it.
increase penalties and enforce it.
Yep.
Is that I mean, is there a consensus on that of, hey, let's not review the wording, let's just review the fee?
I wanna make sure we're conscious of the businesses and I don't know if we need to have them come in and talk to us or, I mean, yeah, we don't maybe need to have, the public hearing is gonna, probably get there, but we're trying to encourage businesses in town to be successful and grow. And these are a lot of mom and pop stores that, rely on this type of recognition or type of advertising, I guess, to draw business, so maybe,
Yeah.
how
So
do
they
we,
don't
how
get
do we make sure
fined.
that we're listening? I wanna make sure we're listening as a council and not just, heavy-handed on the businesses.
I also think geographically there's a difference. I think a temporary sign, in a more residential community area is one thing versus Twin River Tire and Auto on Highway 15 having a sign.
But then how do you,
You
we
can't-
talked about that today, but it's like, are you
Yeah.
punishing your locals, then.
Ryan,
I don't
in
know.
what way would it be different?
I don't know, I'm trying to think so we don't allow billboards, period. But I look at, on 15, they're trying to bring something off of the highway into Sartell. I think everything else in Sartell's, they're already here. We're not trying to drive they're not driving traffic into our community, they're driving traffic, I guess, into their parking lot.
Awareness, though, they're.
But yeah, I think people use it for multiple reasons. Over COVID, I know people wanted to have black signs up because they couldn't find staffing.
Yeah, I'd say a
It-
big piece
you
of it
know,
is hiring.
Yeah, so I think people use it for whatever they need with their business. I do agree, I think we got a good foundation with it, but
And you don't get the fine, Tim, just to your point, like, if they comply, you don't get a fine right out of the gate. They get a chance to comply, and Jill knows when to, make sure that they get that opportunity to comply. It's the people that are blatantly choosing not to comply, that,
The repeat offender.
And that's probably what irks me the most, is we have it at such a point where they just kind of tell us to pound sand, I'll pay your fee. And to me, that's
tells me the fees too low.
not the intent of what we want, right? We wanna work with them, we wanna encourage them to drive business, not just pay a fine.
Yeah, and to your point, Ryan, there actually is a way to get that business off of 15. McDonald's has it with the fixed sign that they can change the message. Hey, Shamrock Shakes now available.
Yeah, that's-
Nick Rib is back. I mean,
I
there is
think
a way to do
I
that.
think Jill put that in there too, she'll drive people to our sign on time zone too.
Yeah, but I think temporary signage is a very good way to drive business, especially in retail. I think you guys are oversimplifying it a little bit. I think it's really important from an awareness perspective. I think businesses do it well, and $100,000 video sign is not gonna be conducive for most businesses, right? Like, I mean, that's $100,000 for that sign at least,
we looked
you
into
know?
it.
So
Yeah,
it's just not gonna be conducive for most of them. As long as we have good
I think she's
bones.
saying advertise on our sign, not buy.
Oh, advertise on that one, not buy one.
We'll drive them to our pine cone sign, cause then we,
No, I agree. Most people can't buy that.
Yeah.
Well, that was, never mind.
I do.
We did get that
Dude,
suggestion.
I can't remember in there. The only thing I would like to consider is if a new business comes to town, if there's
Yeah.
anything written in there where maybe they get X amount of days or whatever to promote it for whether it's hiring, whatever they wanna put on there. I think we've had a handful come into the old strip mall down by the, football field and everything too. I think there should be something in there for
That's
new
actually really
businesses.
good, 'cause I mean, I'll point to river crossings, you can almost see kind of the location where a lot of these repeat offenders are. And nothing to me is more embarrassing than us having a new business open, and they will use those banners, mostly for now hiring, but, and then as soon as that banner gets put up, and they're opening their doors, and they're new to Sartell, and they create a tax base for us, and we're trying to welcome them, and she's setting up visits, and then they're getting a call from
Yeah.
us telling them, you gotta take that sign down, and like, welcome to Sartell, like, and you lay the hammer.
It's like a new sod watering permit.
Yeah.
You know?
I
Yeah.
think,
You can water every day, well, you can put a sign up for
Yeah.
30 days or something.
So Pat said it well, we have good bones in the current ordinance, you know, some new business additions, I think that's a great idea to welcome new businesses. And then a fine that's
An
large
increase in
enough
fine.
that for anybody that's just blatantly saying, we're not gonna listen to you, we gotta need to make it. You guys need to have the ability to make that
Well,
work
honestly-
rate where it's not a choice.
Have we probably haven't adjusted these fines since it's been
Probably not.
drafted? So think about how big that fine was when it was drafted. And now we haven't touched it, so it's probably due for a $50, $100 increase to make it drive some change, I don't
I
know.
was thinking more than that.
Or you- yeah.
Really, I was. But I think that, you know, I mean, yeah, if you, I mean, the.
Correct.
That's what
Because
they do, Jess,
Because
yeah.
Because it's cheaper,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, honestly,
I'd pay
that's
you
what
that
we
for
looked
Black
at Gold's Gym when we would do a Black Friday special.
What were you?
If it was,
I don't have a number, but more than raising it from 100 to 150.
Okay.
Cause I don't think that's gonna deter anybody.
because you can't even get a newspaper article or magazine article for that.
I think you can get a warning,
Yeah.
$500, and the second offense is 1,000, or, I mean, I think you need to.
I also don't want us to look at this as a revenue.
We want our general fund growth, right?
I think we all agree there's good bones. I also struggle with, I mean, I think Rusty, your idea for a new business coming in is spot on. I think
Yeah.
that's a great driver. I also do struggle with if it's community oriented.
It's very great.
If I'm a business owner, I would tell you that everyone in the public, everyone in the
Well, and
community
they-
here is welcome to
They-
come in and support
Yeah,
us.
They do.
Am I community oriented sign or not? And
And then
I just feel like we need to,
we end up having to deal
yeah,
with.
we're putting you guys in a really
Yes,
tough spot
Exactly.
to determine that or to communicate that no, it's not community oriented. And so I don't know how to figure that out, but
And I think it actually states it as a community event. Cause like, for instance, a couple months ago, lacrosse wanted to put up try lacrosse for free.
yeah,
And technically, that's not a community
And then we have to
event.
tell them no, and it's like,
yeah.
So
So,
like,
That's
there's
great.
some stuff like that that's gray and up to interpretation.
yeah, and if you do it for one, if you do it for
exactly.
lacrosse, basketball, hockey, everyone else is going to do it. And not sure that's good or bad, but
Right, it's just what
we've
it
got to
is.
have some level of standard.
Okay, so put it
And I
as
think when you give people permission under the current guidelines, and even if they had a lower fee for a nonprofit, where it's like, I mean, baseball would put up their signs, or you know, we're gonna be registration or whatever, or hockey or whomever, to throw $100 to go put up the signs for 3 weeks with an ordinance, I think they would be more compliant as well. You know, I think more people who wanna do it right will give you a little bit of money to do it.
I agree.
Well, I think the benefit of that is we can, just like anyone that runs for office, they get a packet of where you can put signs and where you can't. So if they don't engage with you, they'll just put them anywhere. If we can convince them to engage first, then they know right-of-way restrictions, proximity to intersections, you can't put it in a roundabout. I just think there's an educational
It
piece.
is a learning process though.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, we usually go visit new businesses, so maybe we bring them a packet of like, hey,
Yeah.
here's just some general information now. You know, who wants to-
Right.
But it would be a place to start where.
Council, where do we wanna go with this? That's the ultimate.
Pat's like,
I
I won't
would-
touch this again.
I mean, does staff,
I
does
don't wanna
staff,
open up the whole ordinance, I really don't think that's wise, but I would like to see us increase the penalties, and when I say not open the whole ordinance, I think Rusty's idea has a lot of merit, but you probably have to have a public hearing to change the ordinance to
Yes.
allow that, so.
So it either doesn't, a period doesn't move, or we have a public hearing to make any adjustment at that time that we want.
And then also keep in mind that Carrie's on maternity leave starting Wednesday. Not saying I can't do this, and Nikki and I can tag team on it, but she's who does all of our code drafting and is very good at it. But we can take a stab at it if you guys want us to draft anything different. Maybe that's not necessary.
I'd love to see if you've heard enough of the feedback to bring back some recommendations. I think that would be great. We can make a decision and follow the proper procedures as
Yeah, and I can
as
engage
needed.
Jill a little bit too, cause she knows this far better than we do.
Probably has some of the nuances
I
too
would
that
just
we're not
have
thinking about.
clear direction, community event versus bringing community members into
And
your business.
what type of sign is okay and what's not, I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
black sign. Yeah.
that's a lot of the confusion.
I'd also, and I guess I don't have concern of bringing the ordinance up. Again, I think, why would we push them if it's a temporary sign, why are we pushing them to get permanent material? It's
That's right.
temporary by nature.
Well, and literally, you're almost encouraging them to, like, what if it's actually signage that you don't want, and then they go put it in permanent material?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that, I was fearful that it's like, that's not what we're trying to drive. Okay, so I have consider language for new business, consider community event language, fine dollar, like the dollar amount for fines.
Correct me, do they submit what is going to be on the sign?
I think if they actually do the permitted route, they do. Like, I know the black signs they do.
I was gonna say, they should upload a picture or whatever,
If we get
whatever the
the
sign's
approval.
gonna look like.
That's the nice thing about when you have a permit process,
Yeah.
you can X nay, like, nope, that's not appropriate, we don't want that. Okay,
Since we will probably bring it back at the same time, this was not on the agenda, is there any general prohibition for anyone out here on a ordinance for mowing? So we can do it at the exact same time?
Guess I'd like to just understand the ordinance proposal, like acreage and,
Like, likely, like, so I had Carrie pull all the 5-acre parcels in the city of Sartell, Martin. I think it was 146.
oh wow.
More than I thought.
Yeah.
Really, the only, so I am familiar with these from multiple other cities that I visited myself, in the city limits, and sometimes the cities will section off certain areas they don't want touched whatsoever, so we have that option. Minimum would probably be 5, and then they would have to register with the police department, we would manage that, pull a permit from us, let us know about a kill, let us know about an injured deer, they would take them to track.
Oh, Becker.
I do get a number of calls on it, people want to do it.
I also wonder about the impact now of crossbows being legal for everyone, right? When it was a recurve and a compound bow, it's pretty restrictive. Now you got a bow that can go 100+ yards and,
And that is something we can't restrict, so that would
Right.
be restrict state laws we can't do,
Yeah.
so.
no,
we
I'm just
allow-
saying it's an additional consideration that,
It is, and we can move the acreage up to 10. Commissioner Persky has called me,
Yep.
and like
Can't
this
imagine that.
Activated. And
yeah, he really wants it done before hunting season.
He does. And then, of course, like, you can consider, we've got questions on turkeys too, like, we allow for deer and turkey.
We could add a intensive harvest of goose at community center.
Let's kill the geese.
oh yeah, let's have that, please.
Yeah, Pat, you probably appreciate that.
Oh, my God.
Not
That's
legal
awful.
today.
They're awful.
You
From
can't even
not
go-
anymore, we don't know.
Grass out on your place?
Not anymore, we don't own it.
Yeah, well, we got a little fence
No, I
to
meant
try to keep it
ours.
out of the yard. I mean, people
Community
can't
center.
walk around that path around the pond without, it's all goose.
Yep,
Goose
I will
poop.
likely
Or
draft
undercover.
this calendar.
Yeah.
we won't let them keep on.
That's with a dog decoy up there, didn't that work?
We've tried, we've tried,
Any explosions to the water?
Somebody just told me we need to buy swans and put them in the water.
Alligators.
Alright,
Okay, so I just wanna make sure I understand this right. We can bring back an ordinance draft for that and the sign ordinance, not call a public hearing yet, you just wanna look at the drafts and then decide if you wanna call a public hearing.
yeah,
Good?
cause then we can review,
Then you can review it.
what's the impact of changing this and
decide.
opening it up versus
Okay.
not? Two things, roundtable, anyone got anything on roundtable? I have two things. one is Memorial Day celebration, 9 a.m. No one's RSVP'd. I need to let O'Driscoll know. If you want to go, let me know tonight or tomorrow. It's 9 a.m. at the community center, Memorial Day. And then two, our next council meeting technically falls on Memorial Day,
It's posted for Tuesday.
Tuesday the 27th. So
Thank you.
just
Good reminder.
calling that out, that we are Tuesday, and there's no workshop slated for that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I,
Go with the rules.